Welcome, everyone, to our second quarter Hot Topics. We're so very glad you're here. Today's session is on the many facets of multi-entity, kind of multi-entity everything. And it is sponsored today by Bill, formerly known as Bill.com. One of the benefits of Sage Intacct is it allows you to have the best-in-class software. So if you are using Sage Intacct as your ERP and you love the features and functionality of Bill, they are easily married together. Our speaker today is Jocelyne Ahrens, and she is a Sage Intacct consultant for us at LBMC Technology Solutions. Her background is in accounting, construction, and manufacturing, and she has a bachelor's degree with a minor in bachelor's degree in accounting with a minor in construction. Um, she will be a wonderful presenter because she enjoys Sage Intacct, the versatility and the way that the software can allow you to specialize for your organization and industry within the software. So we're very happy to have Jocelyne with us today. Let me go through a few housekeeping items. Um, those of you who are here for CPE, please, please, please answer all poll questions. I need to send this to NASBA, or I need to have it for NASBA for verification of your participation. If you have questions during the webinar, please use our Q&A function for your questions. We'll do our best to answer all of them. If we have an abundance of questions, which we welcome, and we can't get to them all, we will email, but we welcome your questions today. Following the webinar, you're going to get two emails. One will be from me, and it will be an email containing the slides from today's presentation, a link to the recording of today's presentation, and a link to a survey. We ask you to evaluate how we're doing with hot topics and ask for your input on how we could do things better and any topics that you might want to see us cover. And I ask you to allow up to 48 hours to receive that email. You will get a separate email for your CPE certificate. Now, this comes from another area of our business, a sister company, and they ask you to allow up to 2 weeks to receive the certificate. If you don't get your certificate after 2 weeks, I've got my email here, and let me know, and I will chase it down for you. So with that, Jocelyne, I am going to go on mute and let you get to the really good stuff today.
Thank you, Dawn. Hi, everybody. It's Wednesday, right? So we have a lot to go over today. Many of you are familiar with your environments, your multi-entity. However, most people are not familiar with what the multi-entity subscription actually does, where it's at, and what these settings actually do. So we're going to review what mapping of your multi-entity means, whether you utilize basic or advanced settings, where you access your entity mapping, and proper setup of your inter-entity GL accounts that allow for your environment to properly function. So after exploring all of these settings and configurations that affect your environment, we're going to focus on how they affect accounts payable transactions and what that looks like. So it's common to not fully understand how these settings may later affect accounts payable transactions in your environment when they're first implemented. We run into that all the time when implementing clients. Most people, it's a new environment. They have no familiarity with Sage Intacct, and so they're just guessing at these configurations and trying to narrow down based upon what their implementer has informed them on what choices they need to make. Now, the multi-entity in future circumstances greatly affects your bills, credits, discounts. These things can trigger you to revisit your configurations and your subscriptions and make necessary changes. It's not standard to visit or revisit your multi-entity management until after a client starts finding problems within their environment and they weren't aware that certain configuration settings can cause this. So today's hot topic is going to help you understand not only how your multi-entity environment functions, but also how you further investigate if revisions may be needed within your own. Please note, it is highly recommended you don't make changes to the settings that we're reviewing without a discussion with your implementation and/or support team. You'll probably hear me say that more than once during this presentation, as it's very important you fully understand consequences of adjusting your environment. Anytime that you're in your environment and you're making changes to configurations or subscriptions, it's important that you find an implementer or your support team to assist you with this, since a lot of times clients aren't aware of what it's actually going to affect after you make that change. If you have a sandbox or you have an IMP environment, then you might want to make these changes within it and see what it affects to verify if this is what you want to do. You're going to see a variety of symbols throughout the presentation. Video icon means I'm going to show a demo in a test environment. The link symbol will have an attached URL that would take you to a helpful resource on the designated topic. In release notes or the help center for additional information. People icon means that we'll take a pause for a polling question. So that being said, let's go ahead and pause for our first polling question.
All right. Let me launch that. And remember, folks, if you're here for CPE, you have to answer all of the poll questions. So the first one is, in addition to hot topics, would you be interested in future mini webinars that focus on Sage Intacct add-on modules? We actually had our first one of these on the 15th of this month on Sage Intacct Payroll. And if you missed that, it is out on our YouTube channel. All right. I'm going to give everyone a few more seconds. I'm going to end the poll here. So last call for CPE credit earners. Here we go. All right. Jocelyne, back to you.
Okay, everybody. What is multi-entity? One of the most beneficial features of Sage Intacct is its ability to give organizations with many companies an avenue to easily view and manage company transactions together or separately. It's called multi-entity, and its subscription management settings determine how these companies or entities, as Sage Intacct refers to them, transact with each other. You can access the subscription from your top level in Company, Admin tab, and Subscriptions. Please note, when you're in admin subscriptions, most people will not be able to view these things if you do not have admin privilege or depending on your settings for your user. They're also under the subscriptions, it houses the subscriptions for all of your environment, whether it be your accounts payable configuration, your time and expense, all of these items are housed here. When you first go into your multi-entity subscription, you can see um, they're in alphabetical order. You're going to want to scroll down until you get to your multi-entity management. Now, if you're in a single entity or distributed console environment, it's going to appear differently than the demo environment that I'm using. Uh, Remember, please note again that only full or limited admin users have access to company subscriptions. This can also be restricted further by a user's roles and permissions. Once again, company admin tab subscriptions is where we're at. They're all in alphabetical order, and we scroll down now to multi-entity management. The link provided gives further, a further depth into your multi-entity configurations. And we're going to go ahead and look at the setup of management of multi-entities and take a deep look into this by clicking on that configure. Some of you are scared to think of making changes to your multi-entity management since, like I said before, it was configured by an implementer and based upon probably upper management decisions. Don't fret. As daunting as this subscription may seem, by the time that we're done, you'll no longer worry about any future modifications, and it might spur you to revisit your multi-entity and make some changes. So like most Sage Intacct subscriptions, it's broken into multiple sections. The first section, entity settings, focuses on multiple base currencies. In the demo that I'm going to be using during our presentation, this one is a multi-base currency, so that's why this box is checked on enabling. Now, if all entities use the same base currency, then you would leave this box unchecked. This box is only enabled if you have multiple base currencies, and it cannot be changed after transactions have occurred. So please note, you check this box and you create transactions, then it cannot be changed. You can activate it later if you have an entity that's in a different base currency. So for example, if you have 3 entities in your multi-entity and they're all US entities, and let's say you add a new entity in a different country that you're using euros, then at that point you could enable this. If each entity uses its own base currency, then you might select to enable this. For example, if you have one entity in US dollars and another in yen, if you have multiple base currencies and need to consolidate, then you're also going to need to subscribe to global consolidations. Please note that if this setting ever changes, you're going to need to turn off multiple base currencies. Selection isn't required for transacting in multi-currency. So you can also enable multi-currency management in your general ledger. If you want to transact in other currencies, like maybe you want to pay a bill in euros, then you can also research it further by the link provided. So I attached a link there in case that's some option that you need to further review in your company. This setting also allows you to set up a value approval for currency for your purchase transactions and expense reports. It translates your transaction currency to the common currency and will determine if transaction approval is required, hence the approval and value approval currency. You'll select a currency from the drop-down, and only the approval currency you enable is available for selection here. In this is entity settings section is 1099s. I know how much everybody loves 1099s. I mean, every January, companies scramble to print their 1099s. Got to get 1099s out. And every accountant that you know of, and most of you are accountants, cringe at the word 1099. So this subscription setting allows you to print all vendor 1099s from your top level information with your top level legal name, address, and tax ID, or an entity's information. So you remember, if you look under your company in your settings for your company, depending on what information you put in, if you leave this box unchecked, then you will have the availability to print all 1099s with that company, the top level company's information. However, if you check this box, it changes in your environment that you will print 1099s for each entity with its legal name, address, and tax ID for their vendors. For example, maybe entity, if you have two entities, both using the same vendor. So if I have an entity one and an entity two, and both use the same vendor, we'll just use ADP as an example. By checking this box, it will print a 1099 from entity for ADP from entity one and a 1099 for ADP from entity two, showing their legal name, address, and tax ID that you entered when you created those entities. Then that vendor will receive those two 1099s rather than just one from your top level company. Entity restrictions. Entity restrictions section gives ability to restrict access for transactions. None of these restrictions are required and should be very heavily weighed. If you enable restricting access to the top level, which is the first choice here, you're going to remove your ability to view entities drop-down list, which is where you choose the top to go and drop into an entity, depending upon your environment, of course. It's going to take away your ability to view entities menu, pay bills by entity, entity details on the pay by entity filter, as well as choosing either of the following choices: restricting your GL transactions to entity level or subledger transactions to entity level. So if you choose this top box when you configure this, then you're going to take away your ability to choose either of those following boxes. If you're working only at top level, then you would enable this, which can gain visibility and transparency in transactions that some companies might require. So it really is dependent upon your company and your configurations needed in your settings and how you work transactions within your environment. All right, we're going to pause for a second for polling question number 2.
Here it comes. She said, hopefully. There we go. Polling question number 2. I am interested in learning more about how LBMC Tech can help us with cybersecurity, how LBMC Tech can supplement or serve as our help desk, other managed IT services from LBMC Tech, or you're just not sure. One of the great things about our help desk is it's US based support 24/7, and it's one number to call. All right, I'll give this a few more seconds. Keep in mind, if you are here for CPE, you have to answer all of the poll questions. Very good. I'm going to close it down. Turn it back to Jocelyne.
All right, everybody, let's keep going. So we are in multi-entity in your configurations for that subscription. And the first section we've covered, we're talking about entity settings section and entity restrictions. Within this entity restrictions, we talked about if you check the box to restrict access to top level only. So I will reiterate, if you choose that box, these two are not available for you to utilize. Restricting the general ledger or subledger transactions, make sure all top level transactions are approved or posted. Before either is enabled, you need to make sure all top level transactions have been approved or posted. That's any recurring journal entries set up to post at a top level need to be revised and changed to post at entity level, or they will not function properly. So just remember, if you choose these, then you're going to make sure to need to update any of these recurring journal entries or anything else out there that was set up as top level. And again, make sure that all transactions have been approved and posted before doing this. So by checking the include private box, all unrestricted users can still view top level transactions as well as all entity level transactions per entity. Top level access is determined by the restriction of the user. Restricted users with access to more than one entity will only be able to see transactions for the entities they are authorized to have access to. So if you're a user with access to entities A and B, you will only be able to see transactions for those two entities. Restricted users with access to only one entity. So let's say I can only access entity A, not A and B. Then when I log in, I will automatically not have access to top level, only to entity A. So restricting users, it's best practice for your admin to enable access to top level for users restricted to a single entity so that they can log in at top. If, once again, I'm that user that's restricted to A, then I'm going to need my admin, full admin user to go in, look at my permissions and allow me to enable top level. At that point, when I log into my environment, I will be able to see top level, and not log in straight into entity A. From an entity level, all users can view transactions except for those created at top level before enabling the restriction of subledger transactions to entity level. So I cannot, after this change is made, maybe I'm, into my environment, we never used this, and then we decided to restrict subledger transactions, then any of these transactions prior to that, I will not be able to see. Projects are an exception. Projects will still be created at top level with this feature enabled. However, transactions with projects can only be created for the project at entity level, which once again is why it's so important that you have top level access, even though you might be restricted to one entity. Please note that when you restrict subledger transactions to entity level only, that working at entity level accounts payable and accounts receivable cannot enter automated inter-entity transactions. So only those with top level access and multiple entity access can. It kind of goes back to that, if you have recurring journal entries that were at top level, you've got to change. Well, this is kind of the same. When you restrict and check this box, and you're restricted to one entity, then you're not going to be able to access these because unless you have top level access, because you're affecting multiple entities and you're restricted to just one, which is why you're not allowed to. This means an AP clerk for entity A cannot create a recurring journal entry unless my admin allows me top level access. Then I, as an AP clerk for entity A, cannot create this recurring journal entry because I do not have top level or access. There's also a link provided on that last slide for contracts because that differs a little from the rest of dimensions. So this setting view may be different depending on your environment, and we revisited that, a few different times. I will state that over and over. Depending on your environment, your things may look different. So for example, if you're looking at this and maybe you're following along in your environment and you're a not-for-profit, then your restrict access by location, location group, department, and department group is not going to state the same thing. Instead, not-for-profits, you will see restrict access by fund and fund group rather than location and location group. So restricting customers or vendors, these top two choice boxes, reduces visibility. If you choose these, then you're going to need to create customers or vendors at the top level and then use their corresponding visibility pages to specify which locations and departments can transact with the customer or vendor. I'm going to note and add on to this. If you decide to choose these and restrict either, it's our past experience, and we do encounter this at LBMC. We export them onto a CSV, remove those unnecessary columns, add that visibility column header, and import it in is probably the easiest way. A lot of times clients want to restrict visibility, then they don't know how to accomplish that. And it's usually after they've been working for a while in their environment. So you might have thousands, and that's a pretty daunting task to think of if you want to reduce visibility and do not manually want to go in to edit each one of those. So just note, it's easiest to export these, remove anything you don't need, add that, and then import it back in. And then once you bring those in, you can view your visibility from top level under their corresponding applications. So whether it be AR being customers or AP vendors. And then you could drill into that and view the restrictions tab to see what visibility you've tagged that customer or vendor to. Restricting checking and savings accounts to a specific location or department is recommended to reduce the visibility within entities. Checking these boxes ensures an entity only has access to the accounts linked with it. We use best practice for our internal of checking these. And the reason why is if you have an AP clerk that goes to pay a bill and maybe they're only working in entity A, they are only going to see the checking accounts for entity A available and not mistakenly choose entity B checking account. It just helps to keep everybody in their own lane. So checking and savings, those are two things you don't really want messed with in your environment to begin with. So any restrictions upon them just helps keep your visibility in check for all users. All right. Best practice environment's top level is where you house customer, vendors, checking, and savings accounts. Let's not forget, though, it's also an umbrella to the entities themselves, employees, projects, chart of accounts, all of that data. I could go on. It's imperative that such important data moves within your environment properly and that it can be accounted for, keeping your books in balance. So you're going to ask, well, how do I define this? How do I make sure that these transactions are staying in the entities that they need? You can restrict this data by location, entity, or user in an environment. But what happens when you have intercompany receivables and payables? So, I mean, what happens when you have a bill that comes in and you have multiple entities that you're tagging on this bill that you're entering? So in steps, the inter-entity mapping, or as I like to call it, the headquarters of your environment, giving directions. So just think of it like the boss. So the boss of your environment, when you have inter-entity transactions, is mapping. Inside of mapping, there are two options for inter-entity mapping. There's basic and advanced, as you'll see on the screen here. So you can tell there's some differences by just looking at this. One has a lot more detail. Common question in implementation is what's the difference between it? I found it really depends on the way a person thinks. That's how I look at it. To some, the advanced mapping makes more sense than basic, and vice versa. So you're going to ask, well, what are the two options? How do they differ? And where is this said mapping located? So the basic mapping option utilizes a common AR and AP account. So your accounts receivable and accounts payable account for your enter entity is used for all transactions in that entity. This single set of inter-entity receivables and inter-entity payables can be shared with multiple entities or directly through cash or investments as needed, and is typically used for higher level tracking. It's simple, it's basic. Now, if your company's preference is more granular, which most are, then you would choose the advanced option for mapping. It maps accounts between pairs of entities, allowing many combinations. We recommend this for detailed reporting as well as greater visibility on who owes whom. Separating your inter-entity receivable and inter-entity payable accounts will allow broader reportability. That's a huge recommendation when I implement. The reason why we recommend this, giving each entity its own receivable and payable inter-entity account, is this broader ability to report. Companies that intend to grow in the future, which I don't know a company that doesn't, uh, is going to want to know when they look at their reports how they owe between entities or what's transacting between entities. And this gives you the ability to drill in and see further detail. So if you intend to have future growth as a company, to attain this, your reporting requirements are probably going to increase of what you want to be visible to see. So vital to growth, also advanced is probably the route you want to go, and definitely choosing to create separate inter-entity receivable and payable GL accounts. So entity A is going to have its own receivable. Entity B is going to have its own receivable. Also, as well, they're going to have their own payables. You will not have one for all of them. To map your inter-entity transaction accounts, you first have to create these inter-entity payable and receivable accounts in your general ledger. Let's just take a look at what that looks like. Inside your environment, under your general ledger and your all, you can come in to your general ledger accounts. Most people have access to this depending on your permissions and your settings. So I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to come in here and take a look at one of these. We're going to use the due from entity 100. And if I drill into this, you can see just looking at these GL accounts that there's a different GL account for each entity of this environment. So inter-entity receivable for each one. If I come into it, looks like your standard breakout for a GL account. These are your quick start categories, your account types, so forth. Then down here, there's this little box. And most people overlook it because it's down here in the bottom, might not notice it. And a lot of people don't even know what this is. If you've recently implemented, then you've probably been asked to check this box for certain GL accounts in your environment. One other purpose of checking this box is on your inter-entity receivable and payable GL accounts. This allows your inter-entity mapping functionality in Sage to properly post. When you leave it unchecked and decide to create a journal entry tagging an inter-entity account. So for example, I decided to leave this unchecked, which allows me to directly post to it. What that's going to do, having a multi-entity with these inter-entity settings, is it's going to trigger an inter-entity transaction. You don't want that. You want Sage Intacct to be the only one accessing these accounts majority of the time. Now, there are special exceptions, so I understand some people might have a purpose for leaving this unchecked. Just know, if you leave it unchecked, you are opening the door for other people to access and post to that GL account. If you check the box, you're taking away that availability of it, meaning this account is only going to be used with inter-entity transactions that Intacct creates, instead of somebody accidentally posting a journal entry to it and month-end close, you find it. Then you have a whole nother mess of things that you're going to be fixing. So on that note, let's go ahead and let our polling question number 3.
All right. So we're in the midst of the NBA playoffs. Do you have a favorite team in here? We've got the final four are Minnesota Timberwolves, Dallas Mavericks, Boston Celtics, Indiana Pacers, or no preference. We've got that choice for you as well. Give you a few more moments. And remember, even though this is lighthearted and fun, we need you to make at least one choice here in order to be eligible. Last call. All right. Back to you, Jocelyne.
Thank you. Interentity account mapping. So we talked about your interentity account mapping. Then we jumped and looked at making sure you create those general ledger accounts for your interentity payable and receivables. Now we're going to come back to the account mapping. Most people think this would be housed within maybe your multi-entity subscription. It is not. Underneath your subscriptions is where you choose your advanced or basic. There is much easier access to your mapping by going to company, setup, and your interentity account mapping. Now, again, based upon your permissions, you might not be able to have access to this. Honestly, we don't think that this should be accessed by everybody within a company anyway, because making changes to these can greatly affect your environment. So after deciding your interentity account mapping plan, whether it be advanced or basic, and creating your receivable or payable GL accounts, then you're going to go here into company, setup, interentity account mapping. And let's go ahead and go to the demo here. Once again, company, setup, interentity mapping. You can see in this demo environment, it's using advanced mapping plan. These first two columns are showing the entities that you're creating a relationship for. And the following four house the interentity receivable and payable accounts. Some of you are probably familiar with these. So if I was going to do a transaction at the top level that affected entity A and B, for example, I have a bill for entity A and B. I entered that bill and I went ahead and decided to pay it. But when I paid this, let's say I used entity A's checking account. Well, how do I know where this Intacct is going to place these transaction amounts that's due from entity 2? Because I just paid entity 2's bill from a different entity. That disallowing direct posting allows Intacct also to create that inter-entity transaction. It's going to come in, it's going to look, okay, well, I have a relationship between entity 1 and 2. Who's going to be, what GL accounts are going to be affected for the payable and the receivable of this bill that I just paid? Looking at this, you can see there's 12900-2 is a receivable. So if entity A is going to receive anything from B, it's going to be housed in that GL account. If it has to pay entity B, then it's going to pay out of 20900-200 and due to entity 200. Same for the last two columns. What if entity B owes or is due from entity 1? Your receivable payable accounts And you're going to go down the line when you create this and create a relationship between all of your entities. You can see there's 21 in this one. So best practice again advises if you make changes to any of this setup, ensure no transactions are being recorded and that it's at the beginning of an accounting period. You don't want to do this on March 15th in the middle, and there's other transactions still out there. All right, let's return to our multi-entity management configuration to review the next section, inter-entity transactions. Anyone that has performed month-end journal entries and tying out transactions between two companies understands how beneficial this section is. Enabling inter-entity transactions for your GL balancing settings allows Intacct to automatically record your inter-entity payables and receivables in your general ledger. So that occurs when one entity pays another entity for a service and will create a receivable and a payable based on the accounts you assigned in the mapping we just reviewed. It also defaults enforcing journal entry balancing by entity. So let's say you're new, you're just doing your environment implementing. This unchecked will default by entity. When you create a manual journal entry with this box left unchecked, your environment defaults to not creating the offsetting transactions in each entity's journals. So if I leave this unchecked, I manually am going to have to create the balancing entries. You could still enforce journal entry balancing by location then instead of entity. I mean, but who wants more work? So, I mean, check the box, let it do the balancing for you. Then you're not in each entity creating those journal entries and looking at your reports, making sure everything ties out. Please note, best practice, balance by entity, not location, including all journal entries for the entity and line items for all locations in the entity. So best practice, balance by entity.
Jocelyne,
Mm-hmm.
would you mind answering a question at this point?
Certainly. What's your question?
The question is, can you change from basic to advanced? I see mine is set to basic, but I don't see the drop down to switch.
You can. You'd have to go in your multi-entity. Can you see it in your multi-entity subscription? So if you do though, like we talked about before, make sure that you cover that with a special, support team or an implementer before making
Mhm.
these changes. And make sure that you're doing it when you're at the end of a beginning of a accounting period, no transactions. We do get asked that question. Make sure that you also are checking your permissions and subscriptions that you can see to even make that change. So,
Right. I didn't get any follow-up from Lisa on her question, but Martha responded in the chat as well that she might
oh,
not have permissions to see it.
thank you, Martha. So manually balancing all subledger transactions tells your environment you no longer track your inner entity and payable and receivables for any transaction. So Sage Intacct isn't going to track these things. It's up to you. Entities can still pay a bill on behalf of another. So A can still pay a bill that's for B, but instead of Intacct creating that offsetting entry, you are going to be responsible for entering the offsetting journal entry. There's no offsetting journal entry to be created by Intacct. Manually balancing subledger credits only turns off your inter-entity payables and receivables, but only for credits, adjustments, and advances. So although you can still create them with your entities, you will have to manually balance and track who owes whom. There won't be an offsetting journal entry to be created for that. Frequently, we leave these unchecked, and most people do because nobody wants to go in and manually balance all of these. And on that note, looks like we pushed in polling question 4. Dawn, it's you.
All right. Let me get that launched. And the fourth question is, I'm interested in learning more about cybersecurity, help desk, other managed IT services. Love to be able to do more for your organization. And our happiest clients are those who do more things with us. And if there's someone else in your organization who could use information on this, just let us know and we'd be happy to get that out to them. So I'm going to give this a few more seconds. I love seeing all of the participation on these poll questions. I thank you for that. And I'm going to close it up. Last call. All right, back to you, Jocelyne.
Okay, thank you. The last portion of that section in your multi-entity subscription is limiting AP and AR credits to entity owners. This keeps entity-specific credits only usable in the entity the credit was issued to. When it's enabled, inter-entity in entity A maybe received a $500 credit. So let's, for example, just say a $500 credit came from vendor A to entity A. Then entity B cannot use that credit. It's going to limit that credit only to A to utilize. Depending on your configurations and what you have as a setting, this can differ. Please also note that this inter-entity credits journal, that's what houses when you limit these. You can set up an inter-entity journal to house these credits so they're easily tracked. Okay, so accounts payable, we're going to take a look at what inter-entity bill posting looks like in a demo. So if we come in and look at this bill in our accounts payable, we're going to scroll down here and we're going to see, look, this bill is tagging 2 separate entities. We're at the top level. So this bill, when it goes to get paid with these 2 separate entities, just sitting as a bill, it's not going to do anything. When I go to pay this bill, that's what's going to trigger that inter-entity transaction. So if we come over here and look at these posted payments, and let's see, make sure that we get the right one there. So this $1,500 one, 2 entities, come over here to posted payments. This one right here, we're going to look at it. Here's the bill. Come on over here to posting details tab. And this is where it's going to show how the inter-entity journals receive posting. You can see on this one, as soon as it paid this bill by entity 1, it triggered that entity 2 now owes for their line of that bill to entity 1. So due from entity 2, $500. If you are in entity 2, you're going to see They owe. So it's a due to entity one for $500. In order to look at what this does a little differently, you can come into your report center to your even a GL bill and create your GL report, not bill, GL report. And I went ahead and minimized this already just for efficiency, but you can come in here and you can drill in and see this is entity two. Here's that GL account, and here's that amount showing $100. If I come into it, I'm going to go right back and see that there is an amount due. And it just shows this transaction for this one. So within this entity two, this bill, it shows entity one is due $100 from entity two. So when you transact within the inter-entity, you can come into GL report and drill down into those payable or receivable accounts and see what those transactions are actually doing. Next up on our discussion is we kind of covered through what your multi-entity subscription looks like and so forth. We're probably going to run out of time here to cover everything. So let's just go ahead and jump close to the end. And I'm going to go ahead and look at credits real quick. So if I am in my credits for this, you can see I've created a credit here. This credit is for entity one. If I come in to pay a bill, it's going to be available for entity one. So this is an entity one. Here you can see that credit that's available. So this is at top level. It really depends upon your settings in your environment, if you're multi-currency and so forth, for how this functions on limiting those credits. Please note, we get asked this a lot of, well, I see this credit is available, but I don't know what it is or anything like that. Remember that you can jump into these line details, and any of your line details when you go to pay a bill, it's going to show you those credits available, and you can drill down all the way into the credit details and actually look at what that is to choose. So you don't have to just guess, oh, there's $100 credit available. I'm just going to use it. Choosing that limiting, make sure that any of those credits available stay only available when you go to pay that bill for that entity. So just remember, if you don't want a credit used from ADP for all of your entities, and it's only for entity one, you're going to update your multi-entity subscription. Changing any of these settings is not going to be retroactive. So once again, if you change settings within your configurations, your subscription, or even your configurations for AP and such, it's not retroactive. It's not going to go back and fix any of these transactions that, oh, I never limited these credits. And so instead of limiting a credit to A and not choosing that on my multi-entity, that credit was used in entity B and it shouldn't have been. Well, you can't, it won't go back and fix that as soon as that's used. You're going to have to make that adjustment on your own. And we do get asked that a lot. Don't feel bad. It happens. We address it and have reports out there that we can assist clients with making those corrections in their environment. So I'm going to run out of time here, but I wanted to just quickly discuss a few things and we'll just touch base. One of the last things that I want to talk about is when you have these credits out there or discounts, making sure that you pay attention to what you're choosing, know your environment for what it's going to do. If you're in your AP, you have choice to apply inline credits. That's another thing that can affect your multi-entity. If you have an implementation environment or a sandbox, we strongly encourage you go in, make these changes, play with it, see what it does, if that's going to be the answer that you need for your environment or not. So review your internal process within your upper management or, those people that make those decisions, and contact your support team or an implementer before and ask questions. Research these things. You don't want to make these changes without really delving in and knowing what you're doing, okay? But sometimes these changes in this internal process review is necessary to maintain efficiency and consistency in your environment. So I'm going to jump back in here. And is there any questions?
There are. Um, and Jocelyne, maybe you could unshare, and then Eric can pull up his slides while we're answering the
Mm-hmm.
questions. And the first question is from Amy. Do bills have to be posted at the top level in order to be paid by another entity?
Yes. So um, inter-entity transactions occur at the top level. So if you're in entity B, you're not going to be able to pay a bill from entity A. Those IET transactions come from the top.
Great. And Sloan had this question. You mentioned we're running out of time. I would like to know the pros and cons of moving to multi-entity as a single company. I was told to do this. I was told doing this will allow more functionality in the dashboards, preventing departments to see each other's data. Sending this in hopes of getting more information.
Certainly, we will definitely reach out to you after the presentation and get you further information.
Wonderful. Excellent. And Marianne, yes, we are recording this and I'll be emailing it within 48 hours after the webinar. So right now I'd like to introduce Eric Nitschke, and he is a senior account executive with Bill.com. So if those of you in our audience are interested in streamlining your payables and receivables, if you're looking for ways to reduce costs, and if you're also looking for ways to improve cash flow, you're in the right place. Eric is going to be covering that and giving us a look at Bill. And as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, because Sage Intacct is a best-in-class solution, it was designed to marry up to best-in-class solutions like Bill.com. Eric, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Don. Appreciate it. So my name is Eric Nitschke. I'm a senior account executive here at Bill. So today, going through a very quick high-level review of our accounts payable automation product. I believe I have 5 minutes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Gotcha. Okay. So really just walking through just the kind of the basic offering of our AP platform. And I dropped a link into the chat with my calendar. So if any of you want to see a personalized demo, or we can show you a product demonstration that addresses your specific use case, we can definitely do so. But essentially, Bill is a best-in-class AP solution that helps companies reduce inefficiencies and redundancies in their AP process. We also have an AR functionality component as well too, as well as a spend and expense solution. But today we'll just be covering the AP, but I'm happy to drill into those other products on another call with you. Just shift here. Okay. So the typical results you get when you move to Bill is like you spend less time on those AP tasks, right? Because we automate a lot of those manual processes there. You're able to build customized approval workflows that fit your business, right? So you can make rules based on dollar amounts, vendor codes, various other type of rules to make sure the appropriate people are approving the bill as they should. You also get a complete picture of all the cash going in and out of your business. You know, the premise is being able to extend the payables and pull in the receivables quicker. You also have digital audit trails of every invoice, every payment. So it makes it easy for you to pull up that information if you're ever audited or you just need to see the information on that specific invoice or vendor bill. But essentially how we streamline the payables is we have a 4-step process here. And with Bill, what's unique about Bill compared to a lot of our competitors is that not only are we a software company, but we're also a licensed money transmitter in all 50 states. So essentially we are basically a bank built upon SaaS software. So we're able to accumulate your entire AP process under one platform, and then we sync seamlessly with Intacct. So Intacct is one of our top marketplace partners. We are their top partner 4 years in a row. We have a pre-configured sync. We can connect at the top level. We can connect at the entity level. We can do a combination of both. But our solution engineering team can figure out which way is most optimal syncing for your configuration. But the first step here is a centralized inbox where all the bills can be uploaded into. And there's various different ways that the bills can be sent into the inbox. But we see a lot of invoices, millions of invoices on a daily basis. So we have a very robust AI machine learning component, which will assist you with the bill creation and the coding. And then step 2 here is the approvals, where you can build out customized rule sets to make sure the bills are being routed to the correct people. And then seamlessly within the platform, you're able to pay those bills to those vendors. We have multiple ways that you can pay those vendors, but we make it really simple for you. And then step 4 is the reconciliation. So that automatic sync with Intacct. So just to dive in a little bit deeper into each one of those steps, the capture or the inbox, as you upload your invoices into the inbox. Now the vendors can send them straight into the inbox. Within a couple seconds, our technology has already begun working on extracting data from that document. So you don't have to send it to the inbox and wait for a 12, 24-hour period for a team of people to code it for you. We're using technology to assist you in real time. We can also detect duplicates, separate multi-page documents, and also the system will learn how you coded the previous bill and then apply that template to the next bill it sees for that vendor. So once we've seen the bill at least once, about 80 to 90% of that bill is already pre-coded for you. And then with approvals, right? So rather than having to remember who this bill needs to go to and sending out an email, having to get lost in the ether, right? You can create what we call bill approval policies where you can say any bill that's coded to this particular department and is over a certain dollar amount can automatically add a certain approver or approval group to the bill that you designate. And there's really no restrictions to how many approvers you can have on a bill. You can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can have no approvers on a bill. It's really customizable. But the goal of this is to make sure that there's a consistent approval process where you don't have to go to a spreadsheet and look at a matrix to determine who it needs to go to. There's also reminder emails, so that way you can see how many bills are in a certain approver's queue, how many days it's been in their queue, and you can even set up reminder emails to nudge them along so you can avoid bottlenecks in this process. And once bills are approved, this is where then you can make a payment to that vendor very easily. Whether you're doing a check, an ACH, a virtual card, or international wire, the process for you is the same. You just tell us which bills you want to pay, when you want to pay them, and then we can do the rest for you. And this is all schedulable on your end. You tell us when you want to pay the vendor, right? So you can make payments multiple times a day, once a week, every day, once a month. It's totally up to you. And you have visibility into those payments because we are the money transmitter. We don't have to partner with a third party. You have complete visibility as to where that payment is, when it's been processed, when it's been sent, when it's been delivered to the vendor. And if it's a check, you'll see that signed and cash check. And we do this at scale. We built one of the largest B2B ACH networks in the country. About 6 million members are part of our network. We make it easy for you to connect with your vendors in this network. You can send them an invite. They can join it. It's absolutely free for them. They can securely enter the banking information, and you can pay them with ACH or virtual card with just a click of a button. And here's just kind of a recap of some of the methods that we offer for sending payments. And we can also receive payments from your customers as well too. And just a little bit about the reconciliation. So we have a pre-configured sync with Sage Intacct. It's an automatic sync, but it's also bi-directional. So if there's ever a scenario where maybe it just makes sense to continue creating bills in Intacct, you can definitely do that. And then you can sync those bills over into Bill and utilize our payment rails to make a payment to that vendor. And then once we make a payment, then through the sync, it will update all this information in the Sage Intacct for you. So if you create a bill in our system, we'll create that bill in Intacct for you with a link where you could click that link and see the invoice in Bill. And we'll also create the payment record for you there as well. All right, and this is just a quick testimonial from one of our customers, but we have over 500,000 customers using this platform. We have about 30 to 40% of the Intacct user base. So we have thousands of customers using Intacct and also with Bill. It's widely regarded that's the preferred tech stack, using a best-in-class accounting system Intacct and then using a best-in-class AP automation system, which is Bill. And that's pretty much it for today. I included my link in the chat. So if you want to book a time to do a more comprehensive demo, you can definitely do so. We can even get you a small gift here for taking a meeting with us, and then we can dive into your processes and see if Bill might be a good fit for you.
Thank you so much. We have one question. If you would maybe stop sharing and give Jocelyne a chance to pull up her slides. But Lorraine asks, can we change an approver? We often have vendors working for different departments.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely change approvers. You could create multiple approval policies. So if that approver approves bills for multiple departments, you can just build out multiple rules for each department, and that person can be the same approver on there. You can also, there's a feature there where if they're on vacation, you can go in and say, hey, replace this approver with this person while that person's out. So it's definitely customizable like that.
Well, great. Eric, I want to thank you on behalf of LBMC Technology Solutions for being with us today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if any follow-up questions, feel free to book a time. Happy to talk with everybody on this webinar.
Great. So this brings us to poll question number 5. And this is about managing AP. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to managing AP today? All the paper, chasing down paper invoices, managing approval processes or approval policies and dealing with approvals, securely and quickly making and tracking payments to vendors, all of the above, or none of the above. And it's multiple choice. So if there was only 2 that apply to you, that'll work too. So I'll give a few more minutes. Again, my least favorite thing is to have to tell someone that they didn't answer enough poll questions to get their CPE certificate. So if I sound like a broken record, that's the reason why I want to make sure that everybody who is eligible and wants CPE credit gets it. We'll close this down in a couple of seconds here, and we will bring Jocelyne back front and center to go through the highlights of release 2.
Thank you, Dawn.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Eric. I'm previous past life user of Bill, and I can vouch for the simplicity that it does work. So in wonderful fashion. So thank you for doing that. All right, everybody. I know it's around lunchtime and some of you are doing this over your lunch. So it's time to wake up. We're going to go over our 2024 R2 release new features. So today, we're going to talk about the overview of updated or newly added features that were just released on May 10th. Towards the end of the presentation, we will take a look at additional resources and review dates for the rest of the 2024 calendar year, where your upcoming next update releases will be. So as a reminder, Intacct releases these on a quarterly cycle. Mark your calendars. Many of the updates are based on ideas from people just like you that posted it in the Intacct community. If you don't have access to community, let us know. We'd be more than happy to assist you with gaining access. I am one of our team who constantly is letting clients know, same as the rest of our support team and implementers. If you have an idea that is not an Intacct that would make life easier, by all means, please enter it as an idea in the community. And as it gets voted up, let us know that you created this idea. We will help vote for you to make it known that this is a change that would benefit people that use Intacct, Sage Intacct. We are always in there looking at stuff, coming up with ideas, and then Sage Intacct takes these and makes these changes to the software. It's fabulous. So you can easily find a link to release notes from your homepage screen in your Intacct environment. So after this, if there's something you want to learn more on, go to your homepage in your Intacct environment, click on it, go through the updates, and find that detailed information for you to review. As we go through our slides, once again, there's a link symbol that will have an attached URL, takes you to that topic in the release notes so you can find further information. The little recorder movie icon is for a live demo. And the people icon means we're going to pause for a polling question. So first off, let's review strength and financials. So R2 has some great new features. For those of you that are utilizing the purchasing application, you're going to be excited to know now available is a blanket purchase order price conversion. When setting up and managing blanket purchase orders, you're going to configure your purchasing and select the following. So you're going to need to convert transactions by price in your purchasing configuration. That option will enable the ability to convert line items by price for non-inventory items. Also, you're going to need to enable override on transaction conversion type. This option enables you to override the item's default conversion type when you create that transaction. So if that option is not selected, then the item's default conversion type will be enforced and you cannot change it. Define the default conversion type for non-inventory items. If you choose to not to allow override on the conversion type, then make sure that the items have price selected as their default conversion type on blanket purchase orders. Verify your transaction definition for blanket purchase orders meets the following criteria: that partial conversion handling is set to leave the transaction open. So instead of closing it, if it's a partial, it needs to be set as open for blanket purchase orders. Converting by price is not supported in recurring transactions. The remaining balance can be manually calculated. Set up purchasing to convert line items by price by doing your purchasing configuration. Then enable that functionality to convert transaction by price. Don't forget to check your enable override on transaction conversion types box as well. After that, convert transactions by price is selected. It can't be turned off after a transaction is converted. So select save and then add a transaction with price as the conversion type. So to do this, you'd go to your purchasing transactions and then select the appropriate transaction like purchase order. You're going to add it, enter transaction info and lines. If the override of conversion type was selected, then you'll see the conversion type column, just like you see on the slide here. And you can change that to quantity. You could change the conversion type and item quantity as needed. So after it's set for a line item, it can't be changed later in the workflow. Don't forget. If the override wasn't selected, then you're going to add line items that have default conversion type of price. Can't change the item quantity for items set to convert by price. You're going to post after you submit that transaction, or you can use draft. To enable this, you're going to need to have purchasing and business user with admin privilege. Convert transactions that you need to be an employee. And to convert transactions, you need to be an employee user. So if you're an employee user, you will be able to convert transactions with that permission. So within purchasing, you'll need to have permissions to list, view, add, and edit for your items, and list, view, add, edit, or delete for purchasing transactions. Next up, we can go ahead and let me exit out of this one real quick so I can show you what that looks like, even though we kind of went over it here, guys. So in your purchasing, when you configure that, down here is where those choices are for converting transactions by price, and right below it is the other checkbox that you're going to need to choose. Inside your purchasing, if we come over here to purchase order, if I added a new one, you're going to see that conversion type is right here, and it allows you to override, and you can choose to change these. All right, next up, bank matching sequence report. So to get this report, you're going to need to install it through your platform or customization services. To find this report, you're going to go into your platform services, is what I used in our demo. Go into packages, and you're going to have to go into the package library and install this. Once this is installed, then you can run the report, and you can do it through custom reports and run detail of reconciliation matches reports. So you can go through to your custom reports, or you can look it up in just your report center. So running the new detail of reconciliation matches report from the custom report area, you set your parameters for the bank account ID, GL. It's just like everything else. When you're running one of these reports, you're going to choose your filters parameters, and then, or you can look up these by a specific sequence. You can also group by sequence number for easy visibility into which Intacct transactions matched with which bank transactions. You can view both the bank transaction and the Intacct transaction, along with any available transaction details like description or bank record number, and you can customize the report to get just the detail that you want. Oh, I lost a page here, I'm sorry. So here you can see, if you're in the report center, under all reports, under cash management, there's, after I've already downloaded that package, here's the detail of reconciliation matches. And if we came into platform services to custom packages, Under this custom packages is where I would enter that report to install. And inside our reports, you can go to custom reports to find it, or all reports, but it's just as easy to go to custom reports. And if I choose that report to run, then I would set my filters, my parameters. There's nothing in this one, but this is the parameters that you could choose to create for this. So report center, run your filters, then you can view those transactions. It's very handy to be able to see those, how they matched versus just when you were in a reconciliation. You can go back in instead of looking at a reconciliation report and view this report. All right. So in Strengthen Financials, another change that was added is financial reporting for projects or grants. Inside your financial report writer, project filter on the filters tab has a new run as individual reports option, and you can see it here on this slide deck. If you filter all your projects by a project or a project group, then you can now select this option to divide your report into separate sections for each. You can look over and see as it's similar as to department and location above, where you can run those as individual reports. Now, the project has the same availability. No, if you are generating individual reports, so let's say you choose this all projects to run as individual, and your all projects are groups, you can do groups up to 500 projects. So if you have 1,000, you're going to need to do 2 separate groups to do this. It will not do both or all of them, I'm sorry. And here, if you were going to look into how that is found in your reports, my apologies, it seems to be running a little slow there. We're just going to go ahead and look up a report that has projects. And under your edit for that report and your filters tab is where this is housed. So if you scroll down, this is where you can choose a specific project or project group, and then the run as individual. It's the same as up here. Note if it's not a project, it might be, titled something else depending on your environment. And also in your, let's skip over here. So you can also run as an individual report for scheduled financial reports. When scheduling a report, you can now filter that report by project or project group. If you filter by project group, you can select individual report right here. So this previously was not here. Now, when you schedule a financial report, you can choose this and run it and divide it for separate sections for each project in the group. And with that, we're going to go to polling question 6.
All right. Here we go. What CRM system does your organization use? Salesforce, Microsoft D365, or another CRM solution? Again, the power of Sage Intacct is its ability to integrate with other mission critical systems like CRM. And so very curious as to what folks are currently using. The two that we see the most are Salesforce and D365. So I'll give you a few more minutes to answer that poll question. And last call. Great. Thanks, everyone.
All right, user interfaces. User interface, there's always some changes to these. This update was changing the bank reconciliation matching transactions to clear transactions label change. If you come in to reconcile your bank account since May 10th, you're going to wonder, wait a second, why does that say clear? I thought it used to say matching, but interface change added, it's now clear transactions. Note that the state up above will still say matched, unmatched, and such, but clear transactions is a little bit more concise and clear to understand the matching. So this change was made. Also added your clear company data location change. Prior to this release, clear company data was housed in your company setup tab under the import data, and it was at the top. And that was something where it wasn't really user friendly to find. It wasn't there, it wasn't easily viewed or available. Now, with this new release, it has been changed to company admin tab and over underneath your more, so you can get to clear company data. I wouldn't recommend playing with that one though, because anytime you check on something like that, it can be pretty detrimental. So just easier to access. Within this release, there were changes to cash management. So the last release we had, Q1, the bank transaction assistant became available to enable on your configure cash management page. Now it is available by default, and it takes the place of previous import process. You can choose to import the classic way that was always there until the new release, or you can choose to utilize the new bank transaction assistant file import. So either one. Just note, if you are in progress of a reconciliation, you will need to finish that current bank reconciliation before changing. So if I'm in the middle of April's bank rec and I was using classic import, I cannot go in and change this. I have to wait until I finish April's bank reconciliation, then go in and make this configuration change to use the new. This is going to help streamline accounts receivable payments workflow. I think I want to switch over here. Let me exit out of this one real quick. We missed a slide here. I'm sorry, guys. All right, sorry about that. So bank transaction assistant file is going to help to give a fresh approach to importing. So when you import transactions, they're going to be in a centralized location for all bank accounts on your bank transaction page. Let me go ahead and get out of here. Back up. So if I come in here and come to cash management, those imported transactions are housed under bank transactions. You can see them here. Much easier to recognize all of your transactions, and you can use your filters to determine which bank you're wanting to look at. If I was in a bank reconciliation, and we're just gonna choose a demo bank here, this import, you're gonna see this is a new interface. So your import is what's changed. Transactions still come in for your reconciliation. This just allows more formats for importing. So previously you had one CSV import template format, that's it. Now you can export from your bank, and depending on what kind of file type it is, You can use CSV, QIF, XLS, XLSX, and OFX. This also allows increasing control who imports by utilizing permissions. And to ensure that your format is proper for your import file, this also gives you those amounts and things that as soon as you import this, now you can make those changes. You don't have to wait on other things when you're importing templates. You wait to make sure that it's validated. This new one, it will tell you right away if something is wrong with your format or your data. So if this has, if your file displays amounts in one that are positive and negative, you can also just decide when you do this template how many columns. It gives you all kinds of options. So you can take a look at that. Here's what that little template looks like. You can make those decisions based upon this. Once again, to access this option for importing, you need to go to your, not cash management, which is what most people would think right away. But you need to make sure that your bank transaction and such is correct. So, and then you have to make sure enable bank transaction assistant file import is checked. So in your company and your subscriptions, it's not found in your cash management. It is found in that bank, Sage Cloud Services. Same as that import. This right here is what's going to change from your classic import to the new import. Again, have to finish reconciliation that's in process before you can enable this. So you finish that, you enable this, then you can move forward with a new import template, a new way to import. When you import those, you can go to after they're imported. You can come in and you can also view them under bank transactions, not just in your reconciliation anymore, which is very handy.
You answer a couple of questions around this. The first is, if I have a $0 bank item, I can delete, can I delete it?
If you have a $0 bank item, well, within your reconciliation, you can always ignore that.
Okay. And the other question, if you import bank transactions daily, can you import month-to-date transactions every day, or will that create duplicate transactions?
As long as you're only bringing in the new, it should not affect anything. I know previously in the old in the classic form, if you're in the reconciliation, it can ignore all of the rest and basically override them. In this instance, you can bring in your new and then keep track of them in your bank transactions under cash management. It will keep these also for up to 2 weeks plus, whereas before you only viewed these in your reconciliation. Now you can view them all the time.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So even after you reconcile, you can still come in here to your bank transactions and look at those. And the only difference is you're going to see is whether something is matched or not. It's going to change on the reconciliation status. All right. Next up, bank transaction assistant by default. So updated, this new default bank transaction assistant that is now available by the default, and we were just looking at this kind of part of it. You can easily and quickly assign customers to bank transactions and then receive multiple payments for multiple customers, all from your bank transaction page. So after you receive payments, the posted payments in Sage Intacct and the bank transactions are automatically matched for reconciliation. For the multi-entity, multi-currency companies, you can receive advances and payments at the entity level. So to receive a payment, you must first assign a customer to bank transactions. And you can see on the tab or on our template here where it's assigned a customer. And that assigns customers to bank transactions. For example, you might want all bank transactions with a description of ABC to be assigned to customer ABC Inc. If this was LBMC, if our bank transaction comes into yours as a payment you received from us for $1,500, you could assign from the description where it says LBMC that any customer that has LBMC in the description goes to LBMC Technologies. So these rules are similar to matching and creation rules that are just like on your bank side already. But they're not included in bank rule sets like on your cash management. When you create matching or creation rules, then those are assigned to rule sets. This is not. You assign the rule with the bank to the bank of your choice. So when you do this, you create a new rule and then you assign it to the bank of your choice. This runs when a bank feed brings in new bank transactions and when you import bank transactions using the new bank transaction import that we previously went over. And it saves the rule. Just in case you don't have this rule, you can also manually assign customers from the bank transaction page. So you can go to, let me go ahead and jump out of here. So for example, if I went to my cash management, all bank transactions from the view menu up here, you can select cash in and the bank transaction list refreshes with any unmatched bank credits. So then you can assign those transactions to customer page appears. Now, when the bank transaction has a customer assigned, then you can receive or create an advance from the receive payments tab at the top, which would be this right here. For further depth in this, I strongly recommend you go in and watch this update. If you have an IMP or a sandbox, go in and play with it, change it around. There is a lot of things you can do with it. So you can see right here, I'm going to go ahead and if I chose to assign this to a customer, I'm going to come in, I'm going to go ahead and make those new rules and assign it, and then it will carry forward from there. Let me go ahead and stop for a moment so that Dawn can go with polling question number 7.
Yep, second to the last one. So we asked about CRM, and I wanted to ask the question, are there challenges you are facing that could be solved by integrating core financials with CRM? And some of the things that we've solved for are data silos between Intacct and CRM, data accuracy and consistency, the elimination of duplicate or manual data entry between Intacct and CRM. And a lot of folks struggle with a lack of process automation. So if you are Facing any of those challenges, please let us know. And this will be last call for poll question number 7. And I'll end this and turn it back to Jocelyne.
Thanks, Dawn. Moving right along, guys. So next up, accounts payable. On this release, the payment files access was updated. So you can generate payment files for ACH and bank file payments in your AP without needing to switch to cash management. That's useful for all of you that are maybe an AP clerk in the payment workflow within accounts payable instead of going to your cash management. A lot of employee users and so forth might not have the availability or the permissions to go to the cash management for this. So now they can come in here, pay that bill, access these payment files within AP. So to give AP users access to payment files, then to that submenu for payment files, then you need to go to your cash management permissions. Any users that already have permissions to see payment files in the submenu in accounts payable, to access the payment file options, you need to go to AP, all payments and payment files. So that's where the payment files is located. Make sure that you check payment files under permissions for any of you who need updated permissions to view this. Also in accounts payable, to enforce restrictions has been updated to protect integrity of data. They made the following changes for restricted users. As you can see in this, previously a restricted user in a department could edit any department entries in a bill and submit it. So this restricted user is restricted to just Department A, but when they go in and edit this bill, maybe Department B and C are on it, and they can see that and make edits previously. The new change on this is entity restricted and department restricted users cannot post or edits they make to bills that contain line items outside of their restriction. So now this Department A user can no longer edit and post this bill that has departments B and C on it. If you're an unrestricted user, then you cannot. Restricted use, if you're unrestricted user, you can still have this availability. And if you're a restricted user with access to A, B, and C departments, then you can still make changes. This change ensures users are allowed to modify only transactions that they have full visibility on. So you should not be able to go in and make changes to things that you do not have visibility for. So now during a bill approval, department restricted users cannot approve or decline bills that contain line items coded to departments outside of their restrictions. So they cannot go in and approve or decline a bill that does not, if they're just Department A, they can do Department A's. If that bill has Department A, B, and C, they are no longer able to approve or decline that bill. This helps when users approve bills. They're doing so with full knowledge of all the line items. This new behavior matches the existing behavior for entity restricted users who can only approve or decline a bill when all line items are for the restricted entity they are working in. So keeps some data integrity. Another item updated in accounts payable this release is memo reclassification. When you reclassify a bill and change the memo is now updated on the corresponding bill payment in addition to the bill. So you can see here where it has a dash reclassification in the memo description. Now, if the bill is posted to a period that's now closed, then you cannot update the memo field. So if I went to do a reclass and it's closed, this memo field will not reclass and update. Accounts receivable, more flexibility with customer payments here. You can draft customer payments that you're not ready to post now. I personally love this. I think it's great because how many of you get a client payment that's coming through that they're like, oh, on the phone, I'm sending this through the bank right now. You're in the middle of something. You don't want to forget about it. Want to make sure it gets put in there. Then now you can put that received payment in, leave it as a draft, and come back to it or make changes before it posts to the subledger. So it's especially useful to review payments imported in bulk from your bank transaction assistant or a CSV file or maybe an API draft. So you can post draft payments in bulk from the posted payments page. And then if you decide that you no longer want the draft, you can delete it from the list. Draft options available anytime that you create a payment in AR. When you create a draft payment for an invoice, the invoice state changes to selected. The invoice remains selected for payment until you post the payment. And I think if you were watching earlier in my demo, you probably saw one of them said selected up at the very top. Post draft payments individually or in bulk, and you delete any that you don't need from posted payments. That posted payments page now includes a state column to let you know whether a payment is in draft, posted, complete, or reconciled state. It allows a user to post draft payments by granting manage payments post permission. That permission is also new in this release. So, oh look, we're getting to the end, everybody. Polling question
Oh my
number
goodness.
8.
I wish I had a recorded drum roll for the
They're all
fast.
like, go so fast.
Here we go. We'd like to be the subject of a customer success story write-up, video, or testimonial quote. Yes, please contact me. Let me ask my team, maybe sometime in the future. We would love to showcase your organization and the success that you've had working with Sage Intacct and also with the value add that LBMC Technology Solutions brings. So please let me know if you would like to participate in this. And I'll give it a few more minutes. Not minutes, seconds, because we want to get back to Jocelyne. And last call. And I'm going to close it down. Thank you, everyone.
All right, everybody, we're heading towards the end. You see the finish line here. Added during this release on time and expenses is distributing employee expenses. This ability to distribute employee expenses was based on transaction allocations in an expense report. This allows you to distribute employee expenses quickly. You can distribute employee expenses and credit card transactions linked to an employee. So previously, when you created an expense report, you need to calculate distribution, enter several lines for an expense item. Now, when you create an expense report, you can distribute the amount paid for a transaction. Sage calculates the amount to distribute between the departments, cost centers, grants, programs, classes, and it distributes it based on your transaction allocation. So to distribute employee expenses, an admin must select enable allocation to distribute expense entry in your time and expense configurations. So time and expense configuration and look for your box for enable allocation to distribute expense entry. Admin can set up a transaction allocation then for this, and you can see on the side, that's where in the configuration, what it looks like for enabling. Then you can set up a transaction allocation. On the slide, there's an example of how you can allocate by. And then a transaction allocation determines how Intacct distributes the amount of this employee expense. Only use a transaction allocation that are percentage based in an employee expense, okay? A good example, let's say you travel for work, visit several places like Chicago, New York, Miami. During that work travel, then you paid for meals in different locations. On the expense report, you want to distribute those for between locations. So maybe you're billing that client and you want those to follow through and you want it split out. When you distribute the amount paid for the meals, Intacct calculates the expense based on the values. So whether it be, it's set up to distribute the cost evenly between the locations. So enable allocation to distribute. Admin must first do that enable allocation to distribute or else it will not do it. So in your configuration, you got to check that checkbox. Then you're going to make sure and go under to enable allocation that you set up your allocation to distribute employee expenses. You're going to need to go to time and expenses, all tab, expenses, your expenses or staff expenses. And then you're going to need to add in that expense report info section, enter information in the required fields and add a distribute expense. You can see that in the bottom right. So you add the distributed expense on the right, and then down below, you choose an allocation, enter an amount, and Intacct shows a preview of the distributed expense calculation. So you can choose this information, and you can also distribute credit card transactions with this. And to do that, you're going to have to, there's a link here that you can click on to get further information on this. I know we're running short on time, so I'll cut the last part of this short. But anyway, go ahead and click on this link here and it will take you to that section of this release and you can get further information and set this up in your own environment. Additional resources from today and for future, Sage Intacct University. Wonderful place to learn new things and delve deeper into applications and modules of your environment. There's also meetup groups and webinars. The Sage Intacct Help Center, one of my best friends. Community, if you have ideas, put those out there, guys, please, and let us know. We're more than happy to help vote you up things that we feel are fantastic. You're in the system, you're using it, you know the things that need to be added to this that would make it more efficient. And Sage Intacct is listening, so put your ideas out there. 2024 release, we've already had release 1 and 2. Next up, release 3, mark your calendars for August 9th, 2024 of this year. That is the next release date for quarterly release with all your new changes. And anybody's questions? Got about 30 seconds left on before we lose them.
We'll get questions in, and there's a couple of people that I've reached out to either through Q&A in the chat, and we'll do some follow-up with you to get the answers to your questions. But if I make changes to my current multi-entity configuration credits, will it affect previous transactions?
No. Once again, those things are not retroactive. So moving
Excellent.
forward, it will, but not retroactive.
Well, then let's squeeze in one more. Where can I view intercompany balances after creating?
There are some reports out there, and they can get a hold of us. We've created reports before, but there's also one in your report center. If you don't see in your custom reports an intercompany for balances, then you can also go in and add that under your report library or contact a consultant to have it added in.
Great. Jocelyne, thank you so much for your presentation today. We also want to thank Bill.com for sponsoring this session of Hot Topics. And we hope that you'll join us next quarter for a new deep dive into the Sage Intacct Core Financials and release 3 highlights. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Dawn. Thank you.